this. So, some other things that's going on about this time. Now, we're talking about new phases of revolution. What we see here, first off, before we go any further, I want to make sure I'm on track here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then 9. Okay, so I want to make sure I have that right. So, revolution is still taking place, but they're revolutionary ideas. They're not revolutions fought with guns. Two leading forces that were stirring discontent with the old order in Europe. Because again, people were expecting, with the Congress of Vienna, people were expecting Enlightenment ideas to come to the forefront. They didn't. Not only did they not come to the forefront, those old ideas began to be suppressed. And the two leading forces stirring discontent with the old order during the first half of the 19th century were liberalism and nationalism. Liberalism stressed individual rights such as life, liberty, and property, and personal freedoms such as those of religion, speech, and the press. Liberals advocated democratic reforms such as written constitutions that guaranteed rights and freedoms and limited power of autocratic rulers. Okay, this is important. I mentioned this the other day when we were doing our lecture. I want to make sure I restate it here. Why is it I said the American Revolution was conservative? The French Revolution was radical. But the American Revolution was trying to overthrow a king just as much as the French were. Which is not exactly true because America just wanted to be left by itself. The French Revolution just wanted to overthrow the monarchy completely. But why is it that the American Revolution was conservative if they're trying to overthrow the old order? Again, you have to take each topic and you have to judge whether it's liberal or conservative based on that. The ideas of the American Revolution were conservative because the ideas of Rousseau, Locke, and Montesquieu were not new ideas. They had been going on for some 10, 20, 30 years. So they were conserving their ideas. If you wanted to say that the only thing determining whether you're liberal or conservative is throwing off the yoke of the monarchy, then sure, America was liberal. But again, what are you conserving versus what are you overthrowing here? So, in Europe, these ideas of democratic reforms, written constitutions, guaranteed rights of life, liberty, property, this is all liberal ideas. These are new ideas. These aren't conserving really much of anything because Europe had not really had these ideas. America kind of existed under these Enlightenment ideas long before the Revolution. Why? Because Britain kind of left them to themselves. But in Europe, there really was no European model for what the Americans had done. Britain was the closest thing you got, and even it wasn't a perfect example. So, they advocated democratic reforms such as a written constitution, life, liberty, and property. Now, closely associated with the cause of personal liberty was nationalism. Now, what's nationalism? Nationalism is just a love for a nation or its values. So nationalism can be good or it can be bad. Again, it depends on your nation's values. And that's why when the world says, you don't need a nation that's based off the Bible. You don't need a nation that's based off of morality. That is incredibly dangerous. Because we as patriots love values. If we're going to trust the values, we ought to be sure we can put our trust in an infallible, transcendent, meaning no beginning and no ending, a transcendent set of ideas that transcend human beings. The Word of God has always existed. God has always existed. Maybe, the Word of God may not have existed in written form, but God has always existed and the Word of God has always existed in one form or another. Maybe it's the spoken word, or maybe it's the written word. But either way, it's always existed. And this pinned out values. Nationalism is the love for a nation or its values. Well, let's swap this for, let's just say, Mein Kampf. That was the manifesto of Hitler. That is a book, that is a set of ideas that, you can say, sure, they were nationalists because they loved the quote-unquote values, I say quote-unquote, values that go along with Hitler's beliefs. But we look at it through the Bible and we say, wait a minute, those aren't real good values. Those are horrible values. Again, nationalism is a love for a nation or the values that it holds. So, nationalism stirred the ambitions of small and large groups alike to seek their independence or to defend their ethnic interests. The cause of nationalism also promoted a strong drive for unification in both the Italian and Germanic states. So Germany and Italy at this point were still kind of disconjoined. They kind of were independent kingdoms, kind of acting under the veneer of a confederacy. It's a long and complicated process, but they were not unified. And it was this nationalism that will end up seeing that those nations unify into one big nation, or two big nations, as we're talking about two nations. But nationalism stirred that on. Despite resistance of conservative leaders to political change in Europe, discontent with the old order continued to grow, leading to new revolts. In the early 1830s and again in 1848, a series of revolutions broke out on the continent. In both instances, the revolutionary fire sparked first in France and soon spread throughout Europe. Once again, it's an example of the shot heard around the world. The shot heard around the world was more than just a musket ball that was fired from a rifle at Lexington and Concord. The shot heard around the world were the ideas of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, nationalism, a love for a certain set of values. And these all were what sparked the revolutions that were taking place throughout Europe. The Council of Vienna didn't answer all the questions. It just sent everything back to the status quo. Now, we had several revolts in the 1830s. After Napoleon was deposed for the final time, Louis the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th, Louis the 18th was put back on the throne. Now, once he was put on the throne, several things were done. He wanted to try to head off the feel of nationalism, the feel of Enlightenment ideas. He wanted to cut it off at the pass. So what he said is he tried to give in to some of their demands. He said, sure, we'll have a written constitution. Sure, we'll guarantee freedom of the press and of religion. Sure, we'll ensure equality before the law. And sure, we'll establish a French parliament. And that worked for a while. And then guess what? They all began to be stifled. And by the way, the Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, he's passed away now, but years ago he gave the speech, as I understand, he gave the speech because he also taught in law school. He gave the speech at least once every year when he taught in law school. He was a conservative. He talked about the ideas of conservative judicial practices. He talked about how when you look at how we judge based on a constitution that's been held to for 200 years. He said, but ironically, you can look at other nations. You can look at the constitution of the Soviet Union, for instance. You know what it'll promise? The Constitution of the Soviet Union will promise freedom of the press. It'll promise freedom of the speech. It'll promise freedom of assembly. But it's all lip service. You don't actually have the backbone, the value system to follow through with that written constitution. America has a constitution, and it's been held to for 200 years because we all have kind of signed on to this. We've all signed on to this constitution. We've said, listen, we are all going to respect the rule of law. We're all going to respect the rules that have been given to us by our founders. You can go to France in the 1830s. You can go to Russia in the 19 teens, and guess what? They have constitutions that, in some aspects, say similar things to our own. But it's only lip service. Nobody ever does anything. Nobody actually defends it. That's the big difference here. So, then you've got revolts that take place. Well, actually, tell you what. This slide is actually on the new section. So, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to end the lecture for today. Now, if you look at this, there's a lot of people right here that I didn't talk about. I didn't talk about Charles X, Louis Philippe. I didn't talk about the Tower of London. I didn't talk about Nicholas I and Francis Joseph I and Napoleon III. I haven't talked about these people. It's because I expect you to do the reading. Read these. You'll need to know them. Maybe these will be on a test. You need to get these all squared away. You need to make sure you have them and make sure you do the studying. We will discuss more in depth what the test will look like the closer we get to the end, but we've still got a whole nother chapter to go because we're just now starting a new chapter. So I do believe, yeah. So we'll go ahead and wrap up that night, that night. It's 1 o'clock in the morning for me, so yes, I'm tired. So what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for the morning. I just want you guys to know that I love you and I'm always praying for you.